whatever energy input caused the Big Bang, can all agree that it put energy into our system, our universe. And that's the energy we're stuck with. That's the energy we have. Well, I should say we're blessed with. Now, the ether, that is the building block of our universe, is a turbulent flow of twists and turns and ordered harmonic patterns and seeming chaos. This view is very similar to views of physicist Hal Puthoff and others on the zero-point field. What I now propose is a fluid dynamical model of the ether that does three things. One, it defines the size scales of the whorls and swirls in the ether, as well as the distribution of these whorls and swirls, like, for example, like a Boltzmann distribution of this many at this size and this many of this acceleration curvature. Secondly, it clarifies the contributions to, say, inertia and charge and other forces that each scale of these flowing turbulent whorls provide. And then the magnitude of the flow and the curl at other length scales define the strong and weak nuclear forces. And all of these together define dark matter, the inward flow of ether into the vacuum. And I don't think anyone's articulated it that way, but it seems like there's mass there, right? But you can't see it, it's dark. So there's some inward flowing ether into the vacuum. And I'm saying that this is caused by the little tornadoes and the little hurricanes and the little seemingly random, chaotic flow patterns that inherently, as we'll see later in chapter 3, inherently inhale the ether, cause acceleration vector field of the ether to go inward. And that's the dark matter. Okay. So then my fluid dynamical model does, I said two things, now I'm going to say the third. It clarifies the interplay of the etheric features. Okay, so what are the etheric features? All the size scales of the etheric whorls. That's one feature. And I have a model that describes what those size scales are in terms of a Boltzmann distribution type things. Okay, and then the nested flow patterns. The nested flow patterns is one of the features, and I'll just say right now that there is a fractal structure, and that fractal structure has large flows, and then from the large flows come smaller flows, and from those are caused even smaller flows, all the way down to the smallest size that could possibly exist, which is zero, which is undefinable, and all of those levels contribute to the viscosity of that fluid, as well as its dark matter content, its energy density ad infinitum. And then another feature is the scale of the flow curl. So there's small curls and there's big curls, and each one of these sum up to certain forces. All of these interplays of the etheric features are part of a systems theory approach a la Erwin Laszlo. That is, some subsystems exist in megasystems. And then another thing I propose in this fluid dynamical model, and last fourth thing, is it prepares us to build light and mass out of the said features that I just talked about, which in turn provide order to our universe. Order as in Ilya Prigogine, who teaches the inevitability of order among chaos, and how things like that evolve in our universe, societies and so forth, and intelligence. So, now that I've said all that, I can now propose a model for the ether. Blaney model of the zero-point field or the ether. 1. Start with the building blocks. 2. Build the zero-point field with the building blocks. Okay, start with the building blocks. Ether flows over a 3D Euclidean grid. 2. As etheric position with respect to grid changes, time occurs. Change equals time. We build our zero-point field with the building blocks I just said. Okay, if the universe was a complete void with perfectly still ether, unstable, but just pretend for now that it's stable. The void. And you could be, say, like a magical angel and magically drop a single angel tear into that quiescent ether. What would happen? Well, as a chemical engineer, I say, obviously, in an imaginary quiescent void with zero density and zero viscosity, you'd get virtually infinite turbulence. How do I know this? I'm a chemical engineer, and that's a whole nother maybe video. But let's look at one little part of this turbulence in our inviscid and weightless ether. We see a seemingly infinite number of swirls and spirals and whirls and so forth. And notice that this inviscid ether flows in a curved pattern. That's the natural way, you know. And that alone means that it's accelerating, right? Because anything in a curved pattern is accelerating. It's accelerating to the right or to the left, or it's going faster, you know, or slower than before. And what is accelerating ether but gravity, right? It's not a point mass gravity, but it's a pattern. It's a flowing etheric pattern flowing inwardly, filled with accelerating vectors, accelerating etheric flow vectors pointing inwardly, and that is gravity. So I'm not saying anything new here other than we're looking at a smaller scale, and we're seeing the turbulence and the curvature of the flow at very small scales, which the general theory doesn't cover, but I'm adding to the general theory. Okay, I have a final summary. Etheric turbulence at all length scales and all time scales, that is how fast it's accelerating is the time scale, produces a fluid with viscosity and energy density that are non-zero. The viscosity is still seemingly tiny compared to the ultra-dense fluids that we use in everyday life, like air, water, honey, and so forth. But like air and water, the zero-point field's ether is comprised of flowing entities that give it substance and allow forces to be transmitted through it. And it even limits the speed of light to c, as we'll see in Chapter 3. I think it's exciting that my own journey to extend Albert Einstein's work appears to not only agree with string theory, but to actually explain string theory in a way that I personally can visualize and understand it. I'll look forward to telling you about my model of a photon in the next video. It is really the most elegantly beautiful theory I've ever seen in my life.